Our main thing is helping people overcome unwanted habits, depressiveness, anxiousness, all the stuff that people are going to, in general, mental health therapies for. But with clinical hypnotherapy, we find that the recovery rates are just astronomically through the roof, faster and more permanent. And there are reasons behind that. And it tends to be the same with a lot of these addictions. So we want to get to the root cause underneath the behavior, because when we say that the problem isn't pornography, you got to remember that pornography is a symptom, just like alcoholism is a symptom. And if you fix the internal state, there is no addiction that can resist proper subconscious reprogramming. It just can't. It's like all those trigger scenarios and locations and emotions that used to come up. It's like they don't even exist anymore.
Yeah, if you work on what's on the inside, the subconscious, you're not even going to have to worry about those triggers anymore.
This is Rock Bottom with Ryan. No sugarcoating, no filters. The pain, the chaos, the truth. No bullshit. Just recovery.
Hey everybody, I just want to let you know that this episode is brought to you by Bruce Hadia. He is the author of Chaos Between My Ears book. If you ever felt like the hardest battle wasn't with alcohol or drugs, but with your own thoughts, then Bruce Hadia's new book, Chaos Between My Ears, Front Row Seat to an Addict's Mind, is just for you. Bruce takes you inside the conversations that happen before every bad decision, every broken promise, and every attempt to escape. This is a raw, honest, and unfiltered look at addiction, mental health, and the fight to reclaim your life. Whether you're in recovery, still struggling, or love someone who is, this book reminds us that no matter how far you've fallen, your story isn't over. You can grab your copy today on Amazon and other places where they sell books, Books A Million, and tons of other places that sell books. And while you're at it, give Bruce a follow on Instagram. It's at Bruce Hadia, at BruceHaAJA, for updates, encouragement, and to support his mission, bringing hope to those who need it most. Thank you so much. Check out Bruce. Check out his book. Enjoy this episode. Don't forget to like and subscribe, y'all. Have a great day. All right, welcome to another episode of Rock Bottom with Ryan. I'm here with my guest today, Nelson Whiting. Nelson, how you doing?
Great. Thanks for having me on, Ryan.
Yeah, really excited to have you on today, and we're going to be talking about a couple different subjects. Most notably, we're going to talk a little bit about your book titled Your Problem Isn't Pornography, which is a fascinating subject, especially when on the show we talk a lot about recovery from addictions like alcohol or drugs, but we're going to go and delve into a little bit more about addiction to pornography and all those things and how they're all kind of correlated. So yeah, if you wouldn't mind just telling us a little bit about yourself, and my listeners out there probably want to know where you're from and what got you into writing in the first place, and then we'll kind of jump into the early years.
Yeah, so my name's Nelson Whiting. I own a hypnotherapy clinic called No Limits Hypnotherapy, and I've been doing this for about 7 years. Jumped into, I can give you more of the history if you want to go down that route, but our main thing is helping people overcome unwanted habits, depressiveness, anxiousness, all the stuff that people are going to, in general, mental health therapies for. But with clinical hypnotherapy, we find that the recovery rates are just astronomically through the roof, faster and more permanent. And there are reasons behind that I could share with you, and I'm sure you're going to ask about that because, you know, I have kind of a high BS detector about things that don't work, and I have a very analytical mind. I was a philosophy major back in the day, and I tended to want to dive in and see exactly what works and what doesn't work outside of even whatever might be traditional. And so, you know, I landed on hypnotherapy, but the book itself, Your Problem Isn't Pornography, was written because so many people think that if they have a pornography problem, that pornography is exactly the problem. Just like with alcoholics, you know, that you've maybe seen and talked to so many in all these podcasts that you've done, that alcoholism is not actually the problem. There's always something underlying that's driving that behavior, and that's why they call it an addiction, right? Because you feel like you can't stop it, self-medicating from something that is not actually the problem. So you resolve that underlying thing that we find hypnotherapy hits that root cause and rewires that subconscious very effectively.
Yeah, and I did hypnotherapy for quite a while when I was trying to get over severe social anxiety back in the day, and I realized a lot of that anxiety was probably caused by my alcoholism, and I was trying to quit drinking, and the more I quit drinking, the worse the anxiety got. So I saw a hypnotherapist, which actually turned out to be pretty effective for a while. But I couldn't shake the alcohol problem, and I wasn't addressing the alcohol problem in hypnotherapy. So I find that interesting. I was just going in and blaming my childhood primarily, and not my drinking. I was sugarcoating the drinking and then doing the hypnotherapy, and it would get better. But with the continued drug and alcohol use, it was hard to really overcome the anxiety. But I do know hypnotherapy was really effective, though. So
yeah, and it depends on what kind of hypnotherapy you do, and like you say, the direction that you're taking it in session, because we get a lot of people who come in and they're not ready to share everything. We do everything we can to prime them, but this isn't what we do. Is not like a support group or AA where they can come in and just share whatever they're comfortable sharing. In order to get the results, they got to come in and share everything, right? And so we want to see all the other areas of their life that they're struggling in, because if we can find root causes and then tie them together and see how they're related, we can collapse a whole bunch more at one time.
Exactly. Well, I want to know a little bit about your story before starting in hypnotherapy business and writing a book and all that. Like, what was your life like growing up and before being inspired to do all of this? Like childhood,
good
family
question.
dynamic, all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up here in Utah. Everyone's Mormon down here, so I grew up Mormon. I have an LDS background, and we all have this intense accountability with all of the church leaders and friend groups and social kind of community that a lot of times it works so well for AA, but it's kind of built in from a very young age inside the church that, hey, you don't do drugs, you don't smoke, you don't drink, all that kind of stuff. And that's, and you don't look at pornography, right? And so that level of kind of cleanliness or moral straightness was at least an ideal, if not necessarily a fix, because increased accountability does not necessarily lead to having fixed the problem, right? In a lot of cases, it can perpetuate the problem because it leads to more guilt complex and perfectionism, because you're just being reminded so many times how bad you are every time you fail, and you got to report it, and there's accountability. So in the church, you have all this confession practice, confessing to the bishop, confessing to someone else if they need you to confess to somebody else. But anyway, I grew up in that, and I didn't necessarily think there was anything wrong with any of that, but that was the community that I grew up in. And it's partly why I focus on helping guys with pornography, Christian guys, LDS guys. Like, that tends to be the tribe that I'm surrounded by here in Utah and in Idaho. You've probably seen it a lot up there. There's kind of this Mormon corridor from, Arizona up through Idaho and Colorado. And so there's about 7 million members of the church in this area, and I tend to be like right smack dab in the middle. So that tends to be a lot of our audience. And so we help these Christian LDS guys that have become so entrenched in these problems. But before I got into any of that, of course, I was just this average kid, an average church-going kid. I was not necessarily super, smart or outgoing. I just kind of kept to myself and did my thing growing up. I ended up going on an LDS mission, came back and ended up teaching seminary for the LDS church, was hired by them, did that for a little bit. But before that, backing up, that might be more related to what you're asking about hypnosis and hypnotherapy and how I got into it, was when I was 17, moving into 18 years old as a senior in high school. I was not wanting to put in the work to get straight A's. I was happy to be a good student, and I wanted to be a good student, but the classes that I was in were not super exhilarating to me, but I wanted to get my good grades, right? I wanted to get into a good college. And so I thought, well, how can I cheat without cheating? How can I be smarter and not work harder, right? And so I came across this book that my cousin gave me called Double Your Brain Power by Jean Marie Stein. And I devoured that thing. And in there was an exercise that talked about getting you into a hyper state of focus and being able to memorize things, called the optimum learning state, getting into an alpha state. And I thought, an alpha state, that's interesting. Never heard of anything like that. And so when I was 17 years old, I started doing this little practice. It took about 5 minutes. If your listeners are interested, it's basically some box breathing diaphragmatically, 5 seconds in, 5 seconds hold, 5 seconds out, 5 seconds hold. And you do that for about 7 rounds of breathing, because we know that when you stimulate that vagus nerve, it tells your brain to slow down the brainwave state. And then in that slower brainwave state, your own brain opens itself to suggestion. It moves out of kind of survival mode. So instead of opening up a textbook and saying, hey, I have to learn this, I'm going to be tested on this, and you have a little bit of anxiety about that, it shuts off that survival mechanism. And then you give yourself these powerful affirmations like, hey, I'm a great learner. I love learning. I remember everything that I learn. And you just do that over and over for 2 or 3 rounds of affirmations. So the breathing and the affirmations, you do it 3 times in a row. And that took about 5 minutes. So I'd do that before all of my studies. And I realized, holy cow, man, I'm getting 100% on all of my anatomy tests, for example, right? Just straight memorization. And all I'm doing is getting myself in this state, absorbing the information in one go through, maybe a second go through of the terminology, and then going to the test, putting myself back in that state so I could recall it. And all the people who are the smart people in the classes were wondering how Nelson, the average Joe, was acing all the tests, right? So I learned that you can really leverage this power of the mind, and that was just the beginning of some powerful stuff that I started to learn. At my senior all-nighter party, they had a hypnosis come for comedy's sake. It's like midnight. They had the all-nighter party going on, and I got up on stage. I was super intrigued about this whole hypnosis thing. I knew nothing about it, nothing. And the guy was telling us that we can change anything with the power of our mind. And I thought, well, that's awesome. So teach me how to do it. And he wasn't there to teach us. He was there for comedy and entertainment. But I went up on stage, and there were about 40 chairs on stage. And this was a wood stage. There's about 500 people out in the audience. And so there was a lot of us. And I'm sitting there on the very, very end. And he starts relaxing us, doing this so-called hypnotic induction. And I'm on this cloud, just like disappearing into this relaxing whatever nothingness that he's starting to put me into. And I started relaxing so much. I was like, wow, this is amazing. What is this? I don't understand what's going on. I started to feel this really kind of euphoric, ecstatic feeling. And I relaxed so much that I started to fall out of my chair. And I go, nosedive out of my chair, slam my head onto the ground, onto the stage. And it just reverberates throughout the entire auditorium. And everyone goes, they all heard it.
Yeah.
And I felt nothing. I had no pain and I found out later, this was an interesting thing. You can get into a thing called a state of mind named after James Esdale, the Esdale state. Some people call it the hypnotic coma, which is a misnomer. It shouldn't be called that because that makes it kind of scary for people. But in that state, you're so relaxed that you produce your own analgesia and even your own anesthesia, which is what we use to help women do self-hypnosis for painless childbirth. So we teach them how to get into that same state. But unbeknownst to me, I fell into that state. So I fall off my chair, and I'm just laying there on the ground. And I just had this most ecstatic, almost orgasmic type sensation. And I had no idea what the heck was going on with me. All I did was follow his instructions to relax. And that was really interesting to me. Another interesting point to that was that he pointed me out to the audience as someone who was super hypnotized, which, of course, I was by all counts of, definitions of hypnosis. However, I had fallen into that state that hypnotists don't like to deal with, because when you're in that state of so much relaxation, you become unresponsive to their suggestions. So their instructions come in and you say, no, I'm so relaxed, I'm not going to do what you're telling me to do. I don't want to do it. And so I was not necessarily an entertaining prospect up on stage, but I still had a pretty incredible experience. That was my first exposure to hypnosis.
Wow. And you were how old at that time?
That was 18, graduated from high school. And it only, it crept up after my LDS mission to Brazil. It crept up again. Just this idea we can change. I ended up up at Weber State playing D1 tennis and got super into sports psychology, wondering how can I play in that high performance zone state, that flow state that everyone talks about, and really be able to maintain that. Like these MMA fighters who hire these hypnotists and they literally can't feel pain and they're just obliterating their opponents. It's that state that you can get into, right? And ironically, speaking to addictions, that flow state that you get in of high performance is the same state that people are in when they go enact their addictions.
Wow.
Their bad habits, their obsessive compulsive reactions to things, because they're this kind of the same as that flow state, What really constitutes that flow state is not necessarily the intensity of focus, but where all parts of the brain come online and say, we're going to go in this direction. And it defers to subconscious programs and says, if we're really good at this, we can just enact it now. We don't have to consciously think about this. We don't have to make decisions because the subconscious already knows how to deal with this. And this is the same thing that happens when somebody with an alcohol problem or a pornography problem or an overeating problem or a shopaholics problem or a gambling problem, when they start thinking about that behavior, all of a sudden subconscious program kicks in and says, yes, that's what we do. And it's going to be easy. It's going to feel effortless to move in this direction. We kind of get this tunnel vision, and that narrow focus almost feels like we go into zombie mode and just enact that thing, right? And that's what people really describe when they're moving into addictions, like they lost control. And it's not necessarily that they lost control, as they literally shifted out of that frontal lobe executive decision-making part of their brain and deferred to subconscious programs. And so that became very, very interesting to me over the years. And I wasn't really super fulfilled with what I was doing. So I went back to school and became a clinical hypnotherapist, and the rest is history.
Wow. So the interest kind of was catalyzed by sports psychology originally. Like you were in tennis and you kind of wanted to learn how to be able to be more competitive and not get as tired, and just kind of one thing led to another there.
Yeah, it was tennis and, high performance in general, but I struggled with my own problems. I had a little porn problem. And I say little because compared to all the guys that come in, man, I feel bad for a lot of these guys that have really been in self-destructive patterns for decades. I didn't have that big of a problem, but I think that, in this day and age, it's really hard to not have that kind of a problem.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really hard not to have some sort of bad habit that you might call an obsessive compulsive addiction at all, right? Like everyone kind of falls into something like that, whether it's procrastination or a lot of these guys that come in with, they think that smoking weed, for example, is not a problem until they try and stop, and now it's controlling them, right?
Exactly.
Or social drinking, or yeah, I'm gonna look at a little pornography, and then you try and stop because your wife doesn't want you to do that anymore. And well, yeah, you realize, crap, like there's something else going on here. Like I am actually self-medicating from something that I feel like I need to escape from. And it becomes hard, right?
Yeah, exactly. So now I want to ask some questions about this book then. So is pornography, if it isn't the real problem, then what is?
That is the $1,000,000 question. And it's a little bit, you could say that it's different for everyone, but I think it's the same for everyone. If there was one root cause that I would say is the root for everyone's problem, it's some sense of feeling like you're not good enough. I mean, that idea of I'm not good enough is the universal negative self-thought. I've done thousands of sessions with people, and when they come in our first session, I always have them write down on a piece of paper, hey, what's one of the top 1 or 2 negative thoughts that you have about yourself? And it's some form of I'm not good enough. I'm not good looking enough. I'm not strong enough. I'm not rich enough. I'm not successful enough. My kids don't like me enough. I'm not lovable. I'm not acceptable. And it's some form of self-criticism
Hmm.
that they're perpetuating upon themselves. And because they have this complex of I am not good enough, what are they going to do to make up for that lack?
Yeah. They're like seeking
Right.
validation.
Yeah, seeking validation, but I mean, it could be seeking validation externally. It could be seeking validation internally, but ultimately that idea of not feeling good. Now, I'll give you an example. Okay, like I actually pulled out one of my recent session notes because I knew we were going to talk about maybe alcoholism. This one was a pornography slash alcoholism mix that you might find interesting. In terms of the question that you asked, if your problem isn't pornography, what is it? I have a Christian background, and so all the people that I'm talking to have a high sensitivity to moral cleanliness, sexual cleanliness, chastity. And when things aren't going their way and they have an overabundance of arousal or lust that they feel like they can't control, what they tend to do is blame the devil. They blame the devil because he's tempting us and he's taking away our power. Or they blame God and say, why did he give me this? That's bad of him to have given me this, right? And so they start playing the blame game, and they say, well, what I need to do then is eliminate. Well, most people don't do this, but internally, maybe they don't realize that they're doing this. Subconsciously, we find that this is what they're actually doing is they're conflicted between this consciously knowing that their goal is to fix the problem and not have the bad habit, and subconsciously they're hitting up against some other belief system that says, no, it's perfectly fine to have that problem. Not only is it fine, that problem does solve something for you, because initially it was not a problem, it was a solution. Somebody goes and smokes because they want to fit in. Like we see that all the time, right? These people that come in, they've been smoking for 20 years, they want to fit in with everyone else. They do the cool thing, right, to fit in. So that was a solution for them. And it tends to be the same with a lot of these addictions. So we want to get to the root cause underneath the behavior, because when we say that the problem isn't pornography, you got to remember that pornography is a symptom, just like alcoholism is a symptom.
Yeah.
Addiction in general. And just a disclaimer here, I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not a licensed psychotherapist. I'm not a mental health counselor. I'm a clinical hypnotherapist. So when I say addiction, I can't really speak in terms of like what the medical community wants to call addiction. What I can speak in terms of is that these I don't like calling them even addictions, because it's just a compulsive behavior, but it's compulsive only because your mind is obsessing and making it compulsive, but it's subconscious. So you don't necessarily know why you're doing it. And if you don't know why you're doing it and you're trying to fix it with your conscious mind, now you're deferring to your willpower mechanism. And willpower stinks,
Yep.
right? Willpower is always going to take a back seat to, for example, any subconscious functions of imagination, memory, and emotion. If subconscious and conscious mind are ever in conflict, the subconscious will always win, always win. So you got to get it on board. So, for example, I'll just give you an example of this guy, because this was an interesting case. This guy came in and said he didn't enjoy waking up. He's not taking care of himself when he's alone. And this is a very high-performing professional athlete, by the way.
Wow.
And he said he can't be sober when he's alone. He's smoking a lot of pot, he's drinking a lot, he has bad sleep. He was falling into his porn habits, and he's not slowing down, not taking care of himself. And he told me, the problem is me. Not me, like him, right? He said, the problem is me. And he says, the problem is me, and I just create my own hell. I was like, okay, so let's dip you down into trance and explore that. And I can tell you why we have to induce trance to do this and what it does inside the brain. But we induce trance, and the first emotion that hit him when we went after why he does all of this was a sense of self-doubt. And so he's describing this doubt. And when I tell you all this, by the way, what everyone does when they hear these case studies is they start to analyze them. They consciously start to critically and logically pick them apart and come up with reasons why this guy got stuck, right? But in trance, what really constitutes turning on the subconscious mind is a movement away from logic, away from reason. And it does not mean that the subconscious mind is not rational. What it means is that it's not thinking in a concrete, sequential, linear way.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's why when we go after emotion, like self-doubt, and try and find out where this all comes from, and you may have experienced some of this if they did an age regression type clinical work in your hypnotherapy, is that we want to find out where these emotions are coming from and then see how they're related back to the problem.
Okay.
Right. So he went after doubt. And then when he went to doubt, he kept getting the sensation that he's not capable of being perfect. Okay. So he's not capable. And he got this idea that he's incapable of sustaining happiness and positivity. He's very frustrated with all of that. And all of a sudden he had this thing click in his mind where he believed that he needed to aim for perfection. Now, this lended itself well to his pro career, right? To be a perfectionist. However, if you ask anyone, say, hey, you're a perfectionist? Yeah. Well, how's that working out for you? They will always tell you that it's not working out very well.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's not satisfying.
Yep.
Right? It's not satisfying to feel like you're always being a failure and you can never measure up. It's just not satisfying. So he said, I need to aim for perfectionism. And his mind went back to when he was 8 years old and he was exposed to pornography at his grandparents' house on their computer. When that happened, he got slammed with this emotion of sadness. The idea behind the sadness was that he was letting everyone down, and that made him very uncomfortable. And that uncomfortable feeling was just really growing inside of his whole abdominal area as he's thinking about all this in session, right? Because the idea behind that sadness, letting everyone down, was that he is a disappointment, and because of what he's done, he doesn't deserve approval or from the people that he's closest to.
It's interesting that pornography or his first time experiencing that could trigger all those emotions that don't even seem related to pornography.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why you say the problem isn't pornography. We've had guys that have come in, I mean, just as a tangent here, we'll get back to this one, but I had a guy that came in, he was 10 years in a program here in Utah. I won't say what it is because I don't want to make them feel bad, but he was 10 years in this program and hadn't been able to fix it. And he came in one session, we fixed it because we dealt with his anger. It had nothing to do with lust or pornography itself, right? Some other problem. So that's what we want to get to. What's the emotion, but not necessarily what's the emotion. What's the imagination going on in his head that's creating that emotion? So what was creating his sadness here was this idea that he doesn't deserve approval or love from the people he's closest to. That's a belief system that he began to believe, right? It's a lie. But he began to believe that, and then he also got this idea, and this is where, as a Christian, it can become very clear that this is like how the adversary exacerbates these lies that you get stuck in, because he immediately began to state, I have to have this sadness forever.
Yeah.
That's not a logical way to think.
No, just completely jumping to conclusions and
Yeah.
generalizing everything.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not a logical way to think. It's a subconscious way of thinking. But the subconscious, now this is very interesting. The subconscious doesn't care what's right or wrong, good or bad, light or dark. It only does what you tell it to do. So he, at this point in time, told himself, I have to have this sadness forever, which as an 8-year-old became literally a conscious decision directing his subconscious mind that I have to have this sadness forever. And he began to believe this really intense lie that, hey, I'm just screwed for life. And that if that's the case, then life and death don't matter. I might as well just kill myself. And he had tried to kill himself at one point in time. And this idea, he just needs a break. He just needs a break. I just need a break from life. Well, that's exactly what creates all the addictions. You need a break. And it's this inescapable level of stress that leads to these so-called addictions.
Mm-hmm. And that's kind of their escape, though, is like, say, going to the bottle or going to porn for an hour. That's the escape, temporary escape.
Yeah, that's the idea. Whether it's something like masturbation or illicit sex or pornography or alcoholism or drugs, because it gives you that dopamine high that is the false sense of relief. And it does definitely give you a dopamine spike. But the problem with those kinds of dopamine spikes is that they spike very quickly and then they plummet through the floor because they actually create more depressive hormones because you're not giving the body and the mind what it was actually looking for.
Wow. Yeah, I was just about to ask, like, what role does dopamine play in pornography use and other addictions? So you kind of already started answering that. But
well, it plays that role of giving you that instant high. But what is happening neuroscientifically is that it's this back part of the brain, the limbic system, that's going to trigger these pleasure responses. That pleasure response part of the brain is I was going to say completely detached. Obviously, that's not accurate. It's not completely detached, but it's in a totally different location in the brain than the frontal lobe that cares about your future. It cares about your goals. It's aware of what's out here, and it's always looking forward. So this forward-oriented future thinking that's reminding you of your goals is in a different part of the brain than the pleasure response. So you generate this dopamine, you get this pleasure response, and you think, oh, this is great. Like I could continue to do this, but that's completely detached from your goals. That's why helping somebody establish goals and a blueprint for their life, like what do you want in life? If you knocked out your alcoholism problem, you knocked out your pornography problem, you knocked out any need for those cravings, what would you be doing with your life if you didn't have those problems? And so they can begin to create this bigger vision. And if they don't have that, billions of brain cells, according to Richard Rohr, who initiates men into manhood, billions of brain cells are going to die off that were created in the brain to help you pursue a huge vision and mission in your life. If you don't pursue that, all of those brain cells die off. And then you're left back to wherever you started.
Wow. So when somebody comes in and approaches you about hypnotherapy, I mean, what are some of the first initial questions you ask them about, like, how these addictions, whether it be porn or drugs or alcohol, how is it controlling their life? Or is that one of your initial questions, or what things do you ask?
Well, I don't really care about all of the story that consciously they can give me. And what I mean by that is, and I want to be careful about how I say this because obviously I care, but I'm not a talk therapist. I'm not a counselor. I'm not an advisor. And if you go to traditional talk therapy, even a CBT or a DBT, that tends to be tout itself as the gold standard for talk therapy. And it's if you look at it statistically, according to the National Institute of Health and different American Psychological Association, different statistics that you can look at, traditional talk therapy is great compared to some things and not great compared to hypnotherapy.
Okay.
The comparative studies show more like hypnotherapy is upwards of 95% in 6 sessions if you're targeting the problem and you have a good clinical hypnotherapist that knows what they're doing, versus something like psychoanalytic traditional talk therapy that some results show anywhere from like 30 to 60% results, but 56% of those people are relapsing after about 6 months. And Tony Robbins just has been reporting on this as well because people have been looking at what he has done. He read thousands of books to come land on what he does, which is basically an NLP group program. NLP, neuro-linguistic programming was developed after studying hypnotherapists. So this, these best coaches in the world are using these protocols because they're seeing that they're so much more effective. And I'm trying to remember what you had just said, what the question was.
Jeez, I don't what question. Oh, just basically like when somebody approaches you in your practice.
Oh, yeah.
And like what are
What
some
we
of
tell
the
'em. Yeah, so it's not so much that we need to know like all of this conscious history. It's more like, hey, what situations are you finding yourself stuck, triggered, so that we can test those in session because somebody can come in and say, hey, I have this problem, and we can start just at that, induce them into trance, and then I can go after the problem. We can just go after it with the subconscious. But if I have a little bit more information about what is getting them stuck, so for example, maybe somebody only enacts their problem when they're lonely and they're bored. Some people do it because they're just exposed to the problem or it's
Yeah.
available, right?
Yeah.
Other people do it because they're stressed out. Other people do it to self-soothe from, anger and just get away. It's any kind of form of escapism or avoiding really confronting their life and fixing problems. And so whatever these scenarios are, maybe it's just they're dinking around on their smartphone. And this, I think, is the problem with really like all anxiety. I think we have such an anxious culture right now because we're so blessed. We have so much luxury. We have so much free time that we dink around thinking that endless entertainment is going to solve our internal connection problems. And so we get stuck, right? And then we go and seek connection on the phone. Next thing you know, all these guys are on social media and it leads to more porn, softcore porn, hardcore porn, then hookups. And now they've committed adultery maybe and getting a divorce because they ruined their marriage, right? Which
It is a slippery slope then you come to find, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, 2/3 of marriages in the US fail. If you look hard at the statistics, the real statistics nationwide, it's like 2/3 of marriages fail. And the top reason for their failure is not finances, as most people think, it's infidelity.
Yeah.
And of most of those surveys that I've looked at, about 50 of the people whose marriage failed due to infidelity, 50% of those couples reported that one of the couple had an obsessive interest in pornography.
Jeez.
And that's destroying marriages, but so does alcoholism. But there's a very big difference between alcoholism and smoking and maybe even shopping or gambling or something like that, in that pornography can be kept secret much easier. And it tends to have a much higher embarrassment, shame complex behind it, because you start telling people about your porn problem, now they think you're like a real pervert in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Right. And so they don't want to come out and be like, hey, I'm looking for a community of guys who have porn with me and let's go talk about it. Right.
It's a little
And
different
have
because
porn
everybody
problems. Yeah.
understands the alcohol and the drug use and stuff. And you can be upfront
Yeah.
about that. But yeah, pornography being so private and something self-conscious, people would be self-conscious about. So yeah, that's something I honestly wanted to ask you, is just like, what is the difference in how people do have different levels of shame behind each addiction, I would assume?
Yeah. Shame is an interesting one because we find that it's the lowest emotion. If you were to try and like categorize levels of emotions that are damaging, shame tends to be right down there at the very bottom. Because as soon as you start telling yourself, I am a bad person, I am a horrible person, the more you focus on that thought, of course, we tend to feel the way we are thinking, and then we tend to act the way that we're feeling. So next thing you know, you're acting like a bad person and you're wondering why. And part of you is saying, I'm not a bad person. The other part of you is like, well, yeah, you are. Because look at all these things that you've done. And so you're irredeemable, or you need to live with all this guilt and all this shame. And so people that are living under that sensation of self-sabotage and self-criticism literally do not have the energy store internally that it takes to overcome their problems. It makes them very, very weak. Even if you're into anything like muscle kinesiology, something like a Dr. David Hawkins, who did all of these muscle kinesiology tests. Have you ever seen those like arm drop tests? They'll do these tests, and in hypnosis we can verify this as well. But if you go into fear, for example, you lose about 50% of your physical strength
Really? Huh.
going into fear. And fear is not even the lowest. Guilt and shame are below fear. And so when somebody goes into shame, it's like they become weak as water. And then it's like any whisper of lie from the adversary that you can't avoid this, or just you summoning up in your conscious mind all these ideas that I'm weak, I'm not strong enough, I can't fix this. It's no use. What's the point in trying? Well, then you're off to the races, just engaging in your addiction again.
Well, I have an odd question about shame and pornography. Can shame actually become more addictive than pornography itself, or the addiction itself?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question that you ask. And here's why. Whether it's guilt or shame or fear or any negative emotion, like I said, we go into those emotions and then we start to justify them. When we justify them, they become the reason we continue to fail, right? So your question is, does maybe the shame become part of the reason or the thing that we get addicted to? It does, because if somebody is addicted to justifying their behavior, here's a better example. If somebody believes that guilt and shame is good because it reminds them of their failures, reminds them what not to do, right, in the past, reminds them of the things that they've done in the past, and looking forward in the future, I need to carry this guilt and shame with me into the future so that I can remember not to do those things into the future. They're living in the past, they're experiencing that negative emotion in the present, and they're taking it with them into the future because they've justified that the guilt and shame is doing something for them that they need. And in hypnotherapy, that's what we want to break. We want to break these associations that they've made with these belief systems and these emotions. I need fear because it protects me. That was true when you were a child. But what you want to do is upgrade your processing system, because we would call that base programming, right? You're born into this world and, oh, I fear this, oh, I fear that. You touch the stove, you learn that not to do that. And people will say, well, yeah, because you fear touching the stove, you fear the pain, right? Because you fear the pain, you fear the unknown, you fear change. That's good for you because it keeps you safe. And that's a big lie. That's a big fat lie. Because once you've learned it, you don't need fear anymore. You can rely on your own wisdom, your own prudence, your own logic, because you've learned the lesson. And it's the same with guilt and shame.
Ties into everything.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of these guys that come in with, that are religious, for example, they'll justify guilt very intensely and say, yeah, that is what reminds me not to do bad. Like I should feel guilty. I should feel bad for the thing that I did that was bad, right? This is a very interesting cycle of messed up thought that guys get stuck in. I've told you, I've done thousands of sessions with guys who, once they finally let go, they realize that guilt is a total self-punishment mechanism. All it does is keep you stuck. All it does is make you feel bad. It does not provide you energy to fix the problem. So if you're using guilt and shame as a reason, or you're using them to keep you out of continued engagement with the problem, then, like I said, because those are based in self-criticism, you'll never have the internal energy source to overcome the problem. So you'd have to find a better motivator than guilt and shame and fear to fix the problem.
Yeah.
And the better motivator would be based in some form of self-acceptance, self-compassion, self-love. When I say self-love, I'm not really talking about like self-care, where people are like, oh, I'm just going to think about myself, take care of myself, and like detached from the world. It's engaging in whatever you need to do that will turn you into the best version of yourself.
Okay.
That's self-care. right? These are forms of self-love, but it's the perspective on yourself that changes everything. So you can move out of being your worst inner critic and become your best internal cheerleader, so to speak.
Okay.
That
And it's
that increases the energy stores internally, so now you can overcome your problem. And this is a big paradox that we find with people who have these so-called addictions, is that they're living in self-criticism because of their problem. Self-criticism in the form of self-rejection, self-hatred, self-resentment, self-judgment. And when they're living in those states and we say, well, why don't you move over to self-love? Why don't you just have some self-esteem? Why don't you begin to respect yourself? They say, well, I can't. Or if I did try to do that, I really can't do it because I'm not going to accept myself until I fix the problem. I'm not going to love myself until I fix the problem. And that's the paradox. Because if they don't move into self-love, they'll never have the energy internally to fix the problem. It's like the person who wants to only feel grateful once they're healed. Sorry, that's not how it works. That's not how the brain works. You've got to move into gratitude. It's a high level, very high vibration emotion. You move into that and it'll increase energy stores. Now you overcome your problem.
yeah. Wow. So like that applies not just to to all addictions, like as far as like not just negative self-talk, not just pornography, just I mean, can negative self-talk kind of associated with shame itself, right? Like that can be an addiction as well.
Yeah, and that is to your question previously of what I do in my first session with people. We make an effort, and in my book here in the back of the book, I have a whole section on self-talk, negative self-talk, and how to move out of that into affirmations. And it's nice, it's good, it's important, and it's a first step for people to take. But affirmations, becoming aware of your negative self-talk is the first step. Becoming aware of the things that you need to be telling yourself is a good next step. However, if you're just doing positive affirmations and telling yourself all these things that consciously you know you want in your life, but subconsciously you know they're not true, like all the people that come in for weight loss, for example, and they want to say, I'm quickly and easily reaching my ideal weight of 150 pounds, and they weigh 250 pounds. They don't want to go so far to say, I weigh 150 pounds, or I am at my prime weight. I feel amazing. I feel energized. I feel vital. They don't want to say that as an affirmation because it doesn't feel true. It actually is more true than saying they're 250 pounds because these are identity statements that you're coming up with. Affirmations are identity statements. So an I am something negative is almost never true. Like we're eternal beings, right? So the fat person that comes in and says, well, I'm fat, well, that's not true. Sorry. Like when you were a kid, you weren't fat. When we're done working with you, you won't be fat. Your spirit isn't fat. So don't trick your subconscious mind into thinking that this is an identity. Just like, and I don't want to offend anyone who's going through any kind of a support group program, but almost all of the support group programs for whatever addiction, just name the addiction, they will have you identify with that thing. I am this. This is my problem. I have this problem. Okay. Thank you for telling us that. That's a good starting point. Now we know where you're at. But you got to stop saying all that stuff because the more you say it, you're directing the subconscious mind to give you more of that.
Yeah.
And so we do want to stop the negative self-talk and move into positive self-talk. But positive self-talk is kind of like putting a clean shirt on a dirty body. If you don't do that deep internal work to find out where this is really coming from, what you're going to do is you're going to get stuck trying to just fix behaviors. So with alcoholism, that'll be like, I'm going to start counting days and I'm going to do this willpower thing, right? I'm going to get an accountability partner. I'm going to go to a support group. And what that does is it starts to turn the person into looking for the answers externally.
Yeah.
And there is truth to that, right? In the Bible, for example, the guy who said, how am I going to learn if somebody doesn't teach me? We teach each other, and that's why community and support is important to get you started. But ultimately, you will not solve your problem if you keep looking for the answer externally. The solution, the healing is not external. It's always internal. And to the degree that any of these programs to help people with addiction are effective, they are only effective insofar as they fix that person's belief system about themselves, the identity statements that they're telling themselves. Because the person who says, I'm free, and actually truly believes that is not going to go back to their problem, no matter what they're faced with. No matter what they're faced with. It doesn't matter what kind of scenario they were in. And I was talking to an addiction coach recently, and he said, but how do you do this if the drinker is around all his buddies and they want to drink, or the guy with pornography is in the shower, or he gets exposed to a problem. What do you do with all of those different scenarios in which they could find themselves being triggered? I say we don't do that because we're not dealing with those scenarios. We're dealing with the internal state. And if you fix the internal state, there is no addiction that can resist proper subconscious reprogramming. It just
Yeah.
can't. It's like all those trigger scenarios and locations and emotions that used to come up. It's like they don't
If,
even exist anymore.
if you work on what's on the inside, the subconscious, you're not even going to have to worry about those triggers anymore. Kind of like me as an alcoholic, I was paranoid about going to the airport. Airport is what I associate with drinking, no matter what, drinking on the airplane, drinking at the airport. And once I kind of just got it out of my head, I'm like, it's just an airport, I don't really, I don't know
Exactly.
why I associate it with drinking, but why I have to be drunk doing it. But it became a lot easier just practicing different ways of thinking.
Yeah, exactly. And the reason, I don't know what kind of internal conclusions you've come to about the airport specifically, but that's exactly the kind of scenario that we might want to test inside a hypnotherapy session and say, well, what is it about that triggers you? And of course, somebody will always have a reason why. Well, it's because I'm alone. I'm not with my family anymore. I can do whatever I want, or
Yeah.
whatever it is. I don't know what it is, but those are the kinds of justifications that they come up with, and they think that they're alone, and maybe now they're finally ready to escape and have some fun, and maybe they think they can only have fun if they're doing that thing.
Is recovery really about removing the addiction or learning to face life differently?
Yeah, the latter. It's all about learning. I think. Well, that's an interesting way that you couch that question, either or, because now that I'm thinking through it a little bit more, I think it is both. I think you do have to face the addiction, and that's where confessing or admitting that you have a problem is important. Becoming aware that there are solutions out there and being willing to take a hard look at that. I think anyone who comes through therapy and fixes their problem has to meet that criteria that they believe that the problem can be fixed, admit that they have a problem, believe it can be fixed, and then be willing to do the work to fix it. But ultimately, I'll have a whole bunch of people who come in, and when we're all done fixing the problem we have a 95% recovery rate in 1 to 3 sessions. If people meet the criteria for success, and I can tell you what that is, which is kind of interesting on its own. But if they meet that criteria, about 50% of the people who are coming in are knocking out their problem in just one session. It takes an hour or two to do this session, but when we're all done, and I ask them, what is it that shifted that for you? A lot of times they'll report what you just said. It's just a different perspective. I have a totally different life perspective. And it's not so much that they have a different life perspective, it's that they have a different internal self perspective. Because everyone's view on life is only a reflection of what they're viewing inside, internally. Everything out there that they see is a mirror of what they're doing internally to themselves.
Yeah.
So when they fix that self perspective, now life totally changes. But yeah, you definitely have to confront it. And confronting it can be extremely uncomfortable, but we don't let people get away with that when we do hypnotherapy. We tell them, hey, if there's anything that you don't want to share, sorry, you have to share it. If you want to fix the problem, you got to share it. We got to go through the uncomfortable, the dark night of the soul, so to speak, just long enough for us to resolve it. And then we'll go to the next night of the soul. We'll go to the next bad, uncomfortable thing, but we only go there long enough to fix it.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I'm sure you do hear so many different reasons and different scenarios, and I'm sure a lot of people come in just kind of like thinking of other people I talk to with issues with alcoholism and drug use. Like a lot of times they go get help because they're pressured from people, and I'm sure people come in from different reasons. Like my wife found out I have a porn problem, or this or that.
Yeah.
Or, I mean, do you have just different reasons that they come in and need help, or do people come in less motivated to fix themselves because they're not doing it for themselves? Does that happen often?
Yes. That's actually one of the criteria that I was going to tell you that we screen for. Nobody can be doing this for anyone else, or they won't fix the problem.
Okay.
If somebody comes in, they're doing this for their wife, they're doing it for their church leader, they're doing it for their kid, they're doing it for their parent, they will not have the internal motivation to fix it. For example, the guy that comes in and says, I want to fix pornography because my wife's got me on the ropes and, she wants a divorce. We always ask them, if you weren't married, would you still want to fix this? That has to be an internal thing, because if they don't believe that it's wrong internally or wrong enough that it's really violating their own internal personal integrity and moral standards, then they won't have the foundation upon which to find the solutions, because they're not looking for those solutions for the right reasons. So we do require that somebody has hit, speaking to your podcast title, rock bottom. They have to have hit rock bottom.
That was my next question.
As you know, and you could probably teach me a lot about this, is that rock bottom is different for everyone.
Yes, it definitely is. Everybody who's on the show has a different version of rock bottom. And some people say, I didn't have a rock bottom, but then when they tell their story, I'm like, yeah, there's a rock bottom in there somewhere, but it also has a trap door. It also has a basement. So it's different things you hear depending on the person and their story. But
yeah, but let me give you an example. I just was pulling this up while you were talking. This is a guy that emailed me today that went through our program. He said, hey, I was skeptical. I tried other programs similar to your own. Most were helpful, but they didn't give me what I needed. I'll skip through here. He said, I've had great progress. My pastor had sent me my book, your book. I realized I had always felt unaccepted by my parents, my older brother, my schoolmates, my high school mates, my fellow undergraduates at college, my distant fellow graduate students at the university, the professors at the university that he taught with. He said, immediately after my first hypnotherapy session, I was released from the soft pornography. I've not needed it for months. I'm not the old man I was before. After 3 sessions, I do not have to pleasure myself anymore. Now, this is an interesting one because not everyone believes that masturbation is bad. But if you feel like it's controlling you, or your heart is so focused on maybe all the pornography that you've consumed and it's not focused on your spouse, then a lot of times that can really damage the relationship, right? So a lot of people want to fix that. After 1 session and help from my accountability partner, I've cleared up my confusion concerning heterosexuality, bisexuality, and homosexuality. I'm not defined by my sexuality. I'm a child of God. That is who I am. And then he gave me like 5 or 6 other things that he said that he fixed and he's super happy with. And then he said, I'm reading this because of what you asked me, why people come in. He says, thank you for your help. My greatest problem now is whether, when, and how to tell my wife. He had not told her any of this.
Wow.
He's an old guy.
And he's wanted to fix it himself without actually having to be pressured or pushed.
Yeah. Or maybe not that they don't want the pressure from somebody else. Maybe they don't want the embarrassment. Maybe they don't want to cause hurt or betrayal or sensation of hatred or anger from that other person that results in X, Y, Z, you name it, right? They no longer love you anymore. They don't want to have sex with you anymore. Maybe on the softer end, that's what it is. On the harsher end, it's going to be divorce or talking bad about you to everyone else, right? So they want to avoid all these consequences, but this guy's stuck now. He's got a new problem. He fixed his problem. And he said in here, he says, I have extreme fear of telling her. So either he's going to live in extreme fear now of telling this person, or he's going to live a life of deception. Now he's got another problem.
Yep. Another problem to address. How would you advise him to deal with that problem? Because if one problem just leads to another.
Well, one thing that we can't do is promote deception, because that violates everything. Accountability and truth, being honest, is going to be the key to full liberation. Full liberation. As harsh the consequences may be, as tragic that those consequences might be by you coming out and being honest, it's always the correct answer. Timing is everything.
Yeah.
When you're trying to share with people something like that, and some people go through the program and they don't want to tell the spouse until they fixed it and say, hey, babe, I did have this problem, but I went through all the internal processes to fix it. Great. Other people want that support throughout the process, and other people can't because they have to pay for a program that we put them through, and their spouse has to approve that. So they have to tell them ahead of time. And so we do our best to tell spouses, hey, if you need some support with this, we can do sessions with you. We can get you in the chair and knock out some of this anger, betrayal stuff too, because ultimately what the spouse a lot of times is not understanding about the addiction is that that person's pornography addiction or alcoholism addiction is psychologically no different than that spouse's shopping addiction or their eating disorder. Psychologically, they're the same thing. And so instead of coming up with all this judgment and say, well, that's really bad because it's sexual and that means you don't love me, you got to recognize it for what it is. It's that compulsive behavior that guy doesn't want. So we do have to support the spouses, but there is a right way and a wrong way to tell the spouses. And the wrong way would be, hey, babe, I have this problem, and just leave it at that. Like you're
Mhm.
dumping it on her. You're confessing, but you don't have any solutions. One of the best things I ever learned in business was never present a problem without presenting a solution with it
That's true.
to your
Exactly.
boss, to your employees, to whoever you're working with,
That's so true.
because nobody wants to work with the person who's just complaining and presenting problems, right?
Exactly, but not doing anything about it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's not doing anything about it is there are categories of people. We have two types of people that come in, and one type, it's about 75% of the people that come in that don't necessarily want to do anything about it, or they're not willing to do anything about it, right? Like we say, hey, you're gonna have to do these certain things. Say your affirmations and do these little techniques at home. And it's very, very simple. It'll take you 30 seconds a day. Are you willing to do that? And then we find that they don't do that. And when they come in, we find that what they're doing is they're wanting us to carry them, like drag them up the mountain. And so that doesn't mean that they're lost or they can't be fixed. It just means that we need to shift all of our hypnotherapy into why they're not willing to carry themselves up the mountain. Why are you not willing to do very, very simple things to help yourself?
What's the biggest lie shame tells people? We talked a lot about shame, so I was just curious of what's the biggest lie shame tells people?
I think that the biggest lie that shame tells people is exactly what a lot of psychology has landed on with the idea of shame, is just instead of guilt, which says you did a bad thing, shame goes deeper and says I am a bad thing, right? I am just naturally, intrinsically a bad person. And because of what I've done, I can't be healed. I can't change. There's so much embarrassment and self-hatred and self-resentment and self-rejection, self-condemnation, self-judgment there that that it just becomes very, very difficult for them to really, really do anything. But I mean, shame is a weird thing because I mean, I've had people who are self-sabotaging. I had a girl who was so anxious. She came in and her parents brought her in and she was throwing away her homework. She would do her homework and then she'd get to class, she'd throw it in the garbage. She wouldn't turn it in. And the teacher would find it in the garbage and it was perfectly done. Why didn't you turn this in? And I don't know. Well, it was because she was ashamed that she wasn't like her friends who were not getting straight A's.
Interesting.
She wanted to be like them. And that's a weird thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's a shame problem. It's an identity problem. I'm not good if I X,
Mm-hmm.
right? And in her case, it had nothing to do with like something maybe sinful, so to speak, or like a morality problem, but it was still a shame problem.
Okay. Yeah, shame is powerful, sounds like. So that's pretty scary. I mean, that's one of the biggest things that fed into my addictions for the longest time was nothing but pure shame around everything I did. Not just the drinking itself, but just everything and how I treated people and just how I communicated with people and all based around shame. So
Yeah. And there's the idea that people try and hide all of these negative emotions. On one hand, they try and hide the addictions. And a lot of people will say, this wasn't damaging anything in my life, when I had this addiction or I currently have this addiction. It's not really ruining anything. There's nothing negative. I'm not seeing all these repercussions. There's no real consequences happening. My wife is still with me. Like I'm surviving. My job is still good. My kids still love me. Like everything's okay. That's a big, fat lie. Because for that very reason that I told you, if you are living in any form of self-criticism, your internal energy stores are depleted. You can't overcome problems. Therefore, if you're not living in that self-compassion state, then you don't have the internal energy stores to give love to anybody else. You might feel like you are, but you're only going to give them as much as you internally are giving yourself. Love your neighbor as yourself, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. That's a process of learning what your relationship is internally, spiritually. In my view, it's your relationship with God and how he really views you, which he's your best cheerleader. He's not a critic, right? That's going to be an adversarial devil type thing from kind of my come from on it. But moving into those high levels is what allows you to see very clearly, oh man, this was ruining my life. It was clouding every one of my decisions and my relationships in
Yeah.
some way.
Oh, so, well, I could press you for another couple of hours about this, but I'll ask you just some kind of closing questions, and I want you to tell us about the 30-day program that you have. So, what is true freedom from like a addiction? I have it written down as pornography, but I kind of want to put it as a generalization as all addictions. But what does true freedom from addiction actually look like? Like not just abstinence, but transformation.
Yeah, the transformation, what we call success, like when we're looking at 95% recovery, we actually have a 14 question survey on a 5-point Likert scale where we ask people before and after what they feel like they got in terms of results. And the very last question is, do you feel like you can authentically, genuinely say you have fixed this problem? And the people who feel like they have fixed the problem report that the freedom, the idea of freedom and the sensation of freedom that they feel is that when they think of the problem, it doesn't churn up any negativity inside them. And when they do feel some sort of a temptation, because we're all human, right? We might feel temptation again in the future to go after that old habit, right? But when that comes up, there is no irresistible urge or craving that seems to overwhelm them into like a binge in that thing. That overwhelming kind of compulsive urging idea, that really motivation to go towards the problem is not there. So that's the freedom that we want. It's not necessarily that you're never going to have the problem again. It's more so if you ever did have the problem, would you be okay? And would you be able to forgive yourself very quickly and get right back on track? Because that would be progress. That would really truly be progress. That's not a relapse. We don't even consider that a relapse. Because once you've learned what you need to learn, that if you ever did dip back into the problem, for however long you did, you would have the resilience tools and the mindset, the understanding, the knowledge, the truth that has set you free, as Christ said, that will get you right back out of that problem. But we have to accept though that success doesn't look like this linear, slope that goes from here up to heaven. It is a roller coaster. And the roller coaster is, when you're here and you're feeling really dumpy and you finally reach out for help and you get help, now you make this progress, but then you always hit this kind of honeymoon phase and you're like, I'm good. And you get cocky.
Yeah.
Or when you hit that point, you might feel like you're cocky and you can kind of step off of your watchfulness and vigilance that you needed to engage in to really keep the problem gone. Or, in my view, as a Christian, I feel like what the Lord does is he says, hey, you're here and that's great, but I actually want you up here. There's another level or degree of virtue or happiness and empowerment that I want you to feel. Therefore, we're going to put this thing on you that's called temptation. Scripturally, in the Bible, temptation just means pressure or stress. That's all it means. It's like forging a knife and then you put it in the fire to see if you can make it stronger. And then you go out and put it through all these tests to see if you can break it. That's what the Lord is doing to see if he can push our limits. But in that state, when you kind of hit that honeymoon plateau period, you need to accept that there is always going to be some level of like life event or temptation that all gets piled on you at once that is going to feel like a backsliding relapse type feeling. But when you make progress from that low point up to this honeymoon plateau period, when you dip, there's always going to be a sensation of fear, like, oh my gosh, this is all going to come to an end. Look at what I'm doing now. Maybe I'm all the way I was back to the beginning, right? Those are all lies. And if you step into the truths and you step into the techniques and maybe things that you learn to get you out of that trough, it never goes all the way back down to where you were. Because once you've been stretched and you learn things, that now becomes the foundation for the next upward turn, right? And so you kind of go up and then a little bit of a dip and then way up and then a little bit of a dip. And this is how we should expect progress to be. And that way we're not so hard on ourselves when we falter. It would be more like you'd be treating yourself more like a kid who's learning to walk. You would never shame them. You'd never try and make them feel bad. You'd never tell them like, why did you even make that mistake? You wouldn't even question that. You just say, hey, good job. You got this on the next one.
Yeah, exactly. You keep them motivated. And I've heard that analogy before about like even just getting sober and stuff. It's like, people are encouraging, when you're learning how to walk, you're learning how to experience life, learning to make adjustments, getting a little bit better each day, and everybody cheers you on. And it's kind of the same when you're getting sober, people are encouraging and all that. And it's just a whole different deal when you're shaming yourself the entire time or being shamed the entire time.
Yeah. Yeah. And that self-encouragement, I had one guy that came in for alcoholism, and to be clear, we don't work on substance abuse. We work on the underlying emotion, right? So if somebody's
Yeah.
like, "Do you work on alcoholism?" We say no, because technically we can't. We're not psychologists, but we can work on the underlying thing. So this guy came in. He was a willpower monster, man. He would go to the gym for 4 hours a day because he knew that if he could pump some iron, he would pump that compulsion out of his system. And he was successful with that. And I know a lot of people that do that, but because he was going for 4 hours, this guy was an absolute beast. He was a monster. He was so muscular. I don't think I've ever met somebody like that. And when we did the hypnotherapy session, it all went back to him remembering sitting on the porch when he was 5 years old, and his dad wouldn't play catch with him. And he began to believe a whole bunch of things about himself, that he wasn't worthy of love. And so he's no longer encouraging himself to be the best version of himself, because if his dad won't do that with him, then how could he give that to himself, right?
Yeah.
And that idea of self-encouragement is so powerful.
Yeah. No, seriously, it is. I've needed that, in the last 22 months of my recovery, a lot of self-encouragement, times where I felt down, times where I took criticism a certain way or took negligence a certain way, it's definitely taken a lot of positive self-talk. So to keep going. And so if somebody listening right now feels trapped in any kind of secret pornography use, addiction, anything, and believes they'll never change, what would you tell them?
First, I'd tell them that no matter what kind of program you go to, there are some criteria that you're going to want to meet to be successful. And we screen all of our clients for this. You have to have hit rock bottom. And remember, that's different for everyone. The guy who finds out that his wife maybe wants a divorce, maybe that's his rock bottom, right? But it's a motivation level. It's when you finally decide that the pain of changing is okay. The pain of staying the same is worse than changing, right? And that's kind of at least our definition of rock bottom. But they have to hit that point. They can't be doing this for somebody else. They really can't be on any mind-altering medications. Any antipsychotics, benzodiazepines, SSRIs, all that anti-anxiety, anti-depression medication is important that they're not on that, because when they take that, it's a chemical hack that puts them back into exactly what the pill bottle says on the side effects label. It says this could increase your anxiety levels, increase your depression. It could increase your mood swings and your proneness to addiction. It could increase your aggressiveness. It could increase your sensation of detachment to your loved ones. It could increase your suicidality. These are all on the labels of these medications. And so when those people come in, our recovery rates might drop from like 95% to 50%. It's much more difficult to keep it permanent for those people. So we tell them, hey, work with your prescribing physician. If you can figure out how to get off that, fine. If you can't, we can work with you until you kind of feel the confidence to taper off as per your doctor. But they can't be doing that. And they really can't have kind of mental restrictions if they've been mentally diagnosed with maybe a mental illness like autism or bipolar or schizophrenia or something like that. The intense levels of that, I've worked with all three of those categories, by the way, over the years, many of people, and we have found success, but the recovery rates do drop because sometimes there's a brain dysfunction there.
Disconnect.
Yeah, we're just not quite sure why people aren't able to articulate their emotions in those categories sometimes, and it makes it hard to do the hypnotherapy. But if somebody meets that criteria and they're willing to put in the work, our company is called No Limits Hypnotherapy. So they can go online, nolimitshypnotherapy.com, or search my name, Nelson Whiting, and they'll be able to find, in fact, if they go on there, there's a navigation tab there where they can go and see some more training on this topic, what keeps people stuck in general. They can get my book. It costs money on there though, so if you want, for all of your audience who's listening, I'd love to give them a free copy of my book. And inside the book, there's a link to, it's not a 30-day training, it's a 30-minute training. Because around here, we talk about speed, right? We fix things at the speed of thought. So we don't want to take 30 days to fix something. We want to take as long as it takes to think it through, really think it through. And so we teach this technique called positive mind management that there's a link to inside the book. So if people want to get that, even if they don't have a pornography problem, maybe they will someday, or maybe they have a loved one. Undoubtedly, they have a loved one who struggles with that. And so I'd love to give that to your audience as well. Hopefully they can benefit from that.
Great. I really appreciate that. And that means a lot. And then can you shout out, you said No Limits hypnotherapy.com, or is that the website, or what are the other ways that people can reach you? Social media, anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, they can Google our name and find our phone number there. They can also go on No Limits Hypnotherapy's Instagram page. If they just go to the URL, www.nolimitshypnotherapy.com, should be able to find what they're looking for there.
Awesome. Thank you. And I love to ask every guest if you have a quote that you live by or want to share. Any kind of quote that you think would be helpful to any of my listeners?
Yeah, I think from my come from, there was a similar question that another podcaster asked me, and that is, what's the number one thing that you would tell people they can do to fix their problem right now? And so I will piggyback both of these. My favorite quote is going to be from Christ, that the truth will make you free. Or the other translation, the truth will set you free. I think that knowledge does save a person, because I think that their inability to make a decision about fixing their problem is based on a lack of knowledge or a lack of understanding. And when you have understanding, you have motivation.
So
and when
true.
you have understanding, it leads to discipline. And the idea that the truth will make you free is it makes you start asking what the truth is.
Okay. Well said.
Right. I mean, that's the real point behind everything that we're doing. What's the truth here? And are we asking the right questions to get to the truth? I think my personal belief is that Christ is the best therapist. And so that other question of what can people do, I think learning how to pray in whatever form you want to take that, if you're not religious or spiritual or whatever, like start a meditation practice. It's all a practice in self-awareness. Even if you want to go, like if you have to start with the Buddhist Eastern stuff, it's such an incredible practice in maturing the self until you can understand the thoughts that are going inside your head.
Very well said. I love that. Yeah, I'm glad that other podcaster asked you that question, because I was going to ask that anyways. So, no, I really appreciate you being on, Nelson, and it's been a pleasure talking to you and hearing such a unique perspective and a different perspective on everything. And I think my listeners out there will find this really valuable. So thank you.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you. And you're welcome.
Rock Bottom with Ryan. No bullshit, just recovery.